From the darkest reaches of space to the deepest corners of your mind. Welcome to From the Void.
Welcome to From the Void, the podcast that explores the strange, the unexplained, and the otherworldly. I'm your host, John Williamson. In this two-part episode, we're diving deep into the topic of UFOs and extraterrestrial life, one of the most enduring and controversial mysteries of our time. My guest is Melissa Tittl, a television producer, investigative journalist, and truth seeker who has spent years exploring the secrets hidden in our skies and in our ancient past. You may know her from shows like Ancient Aliens, The Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, and Hacking the Universe. In part one, Melissa shares how she got pulled into the world of high strangeness, what it's like working behind the scenes of some of the most popular UFO shows on television, and why disclosure may be more complicated than we think. So buckle up, the void is wide open. All right, welcome to the podcast, Melissa Tittl. I'm so excited to have you on. I've been a big fan for a while. I've seen you on numerous TV shows at this point, so thank you so much for coming on today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely, and this is great timing. I'm not going to jump to the good stuff yet, but there's been a lot of stuff going on in the news lately in regards to UAPs, UFOs. But before we get to that part, tell folks a little bit about your background, what you do for a living, and how in the world you got into such a sort of niche, but becoming more of a mainstream topic by day sort of field.
Yeah, of course. I've always been a person to question reality. So I've been doing that, ever since I was a kid. I love writing. I always loved writing. I went to school for TV and film journalism. And my first job out of school was to work for NBC, to work for the news. And I hated it. I was like, this is so boring. It's like, your first job out of school and you're like, I'm so inspired to make a difference or whatever you think when you're 20 years old. And I was so dismayed by the fact that this was some kind of job or reality. And I was not interested in that at all. And so I think because of my constant curiosity and the fact that I've always loved ancient civilizations and cultures and different ways of looking at things. When I was growing up, my dad was in the Air Force and we talked about possibilities of extraterrestrial life, even as a kid. So nothing was really weird to me. It kind of just happened, to be honest with you. I think when you create deductions in your head, where you're like, you just don't like things, you don't need to make a big exclamation to the universe, but you just start to put together what you do like, and then things just attract themselves to you. One of the funny stories I always tell is that working in Hollywood can be, like any job, but it can be challenging. And if you're really sticking to what it is you want to tell and what you want to work on, I just didn't want to do bad reality shows. I just really was just like, I just don't want to do it. And I'm the kind of person, you just cannot force me to do something that I don't want to do. And I know it's a job. So I gave it up and I quit and I started a cookie company in Los Angeles. Nothing, no producing, nothing. Just started a cookie company, sold to all the major studios, all the, Discovery Channel, History Channel. And then I got a psychic reading because I was bringing on some investors into my cookie company and I was really excited about expanding. And she's like, oh, this is totally going to fail. And I was like, what? She's like, in 2 weeks' time, you're going to get a phone call and you're going to be back producing. And this show is going to be the rest of your life. And I'm like, what? No, not happening. 2 weeks later, I get a call from Ancient Aliens. They were just starting. It's a brand new show. They only had 6 episodes that were greenlit from History Channel because I think they thought it was going to fail. That's funny, right?
Yeah.
And so, then it just started my career. I just never left that space, to be honest with you.
Wow. First of all, I need the number of that psychic. That's incredible. I did one show, so I think last season on psychics, and I'm still like, I want to believe, and probably more so now because, I've never, up until this point in my life, 2 years ago, in fact, I'd never had anyone like really, really close to me pass away. And so now and my mom passed away, unfortunately, a couple of years ago.
Oh.
But suddenly I found myself very interested in psychics at that point because I thought, man, if there's any way I could communicate with my mom, that would be amazing.
Oh, you should do that.
Yeah.
If you need anybody after the podcast, I'll see if I can. I'll
Let's
find
talk.
some people.
Yeah, that would be amazing. But yeah, I think I'm with you. I think, we're a similar age and probably grew up watching similar shows. And I remember watching Sightings growing up and being fascinated by the idea. And to me, it always kind of made sense. I'm like, being fascinated with like astronomy and space and the universe. I thought it's too big. And the math just says that there is no conceivable way that we are alone. And so it just always kind of made sense to me. So talk about so obviously you start producing, that's kind of more behind the cameras, but you obviously end up on camera at some point. So what was that transition like and how did that happen?
Well, let me give you a little backstory on camera. I was working at Paramount Studios in my early 20s when I first moved to Hollywood, and I was the executive assistant to the president of Paramount Studios for, I don't know, a good 3 or 4 years. And during that time, J.J. Abrams was casting for Cloverfield, and it was in our building. And let me tell you why it was in the president's administration building in Paramount Studios, is because he refused to do Star Trek unless they would greenlight his Cloverfield film. And because Paramount didn't want to spend any money on it, we ended up doing a casting like in our conference room or something. It was just the casting director thought that I'd gone to the bathroom. She thought that I was there to do an audition. I said, no, I'm executive assistant to the president down the hall. I got to get back to work. I have to get back to the desk. And she said, no. You've got to be on camera. You have to. This is you're like J.J. Abrams type. So I never planned to be on camera, but when she opened that red carpet for me and said, I'm going to get you into these classes and I'm going to train you how to do it, and then I'll get you some agents and you can see how it works. The thing is, I absolutely hated it. 100% hated all of it. I hated the auditions. Really? I thought acting class felt like I was in some weird therapy where people were acting out their past traumas. And I'm like, what is happening? Where am I? I can't do this for a living, you know?
Yeah.
But what that did was that made me a better director producer, because I did start to really understand the amount of pressure talent was under when they were on camera. And when producers came to me when I worked on a History Channel show called Hangar One. Mm-hmm. I was producing that show, and they have no women to talk about. I mean, they have Linda Moulton Howe, but they really needed somebody specifically to talk about the correlation between these craft that were seen in wartime and why they were there and everything. And I had been writing all these episodes, and they said, why don't you just come on? I mean, you've been writing the show, you're doing all the research. Why don't you get on camera and talk about it? And that kind of started the on-camera thing, because I was already doing it, and it was easy for me to step into that position because I was okay talking in front of the camera, and I had done the research, so it was everything that I was doing.
That's got to be a little different, though, right? One is you're memorizing someone else's lines and pretending to be someone else, and the other one is your stuff, and so that's got to be a little bit more in your comfort zone, right? Because this material, and so it's just a matter of sitting on camera and talking about it.
Right. Exactly. And I mean, I love it. I love talking about the things that I'm passionate about, and who I am on camera is who I am behind the scenes. So there's no I'm trying to be someone else. I am doing all of that research, and I'm putting all those pieces together. So it's just kind of okay, I'll step in front or behind or wherever is needed of me.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed, I go on IMDb and I'm looking at your career, and it's definitely a very good mix of one show you'll be in front of the camera, another show you're sort of behind the scenes, and it's a very good mix of both kind of perspectives, I guess. So
hey, yeah.
So talk about a little bit about because I know for me, I can remember some of the first cases that I read about that really sort of caught my attention. What were some of those first cases for you? Some things that you read about when you were younger and you're like, ooh, this is really interesting.
Okay, I can tell you the first one I read about, and I cannot believe I can't remember what the name of the military base was. So my dad was born in an Air Force base in the state of Washington, and it was, oh God, I don't think it's there anymore, but it's east of Seattle in that area. It'll come to me hopefully when I'm talking. But and my grandparents had saved this, the day that my dad was born, newspaper article, and they had put it away and sealed it or whatever. It was like, oh, and they were living on the base at the time because my grandfather was working for the government. And they had a huge UFO sighting the day that my dad was born. And it was always a topic of conversation. And I was so fascinated about it. And he would bring it up, and I would kind of use it against him. Like, I think you're from another planet, like when you're a teenager. But, but I always thought it was really weird because they never could figure out what it was. And it was like, a circular round shaped craft from the 1950s looking thing. And my dad said they were doing experimental stuff, but it was so big in the sky. They even had a picture of it. And I was so fascinated with it. I was like, how? I mean, and then it was on his birthday. It was just so odd. And that sat in our house forever. So, I mean, it's not like the most mind-blowing case, but it was kind of like, was always in the back of my mind. Like, what was that? Is that something top secret? If it is, where did they get the technology? And if it's top secret and that was 1950, why are we not seeing that kind of craft today? Because that's 1950. And now, we were in 2024. So I think that I always went back to that origin point of just kind of dumbfounded that there was no answers. And then everything that happened after that, all the cases, all the people that had all these experiences, there was never a moment in my mind where I thought this is not true.
Interesting.
Ben Hansen and I are co-host UFO Witness, and I'm more Mulder and he's more Scully, right? Like he's like the nuts and bolts girl, and I'm like the weirdo in the basement, right? Like I'm like, well, what if blah, 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 because I have a little bit more freedom to do that, where he's kind of, that's his niche, right? To look at all that. But what I can say about that being the impetus for this thing in my mind being like, well, what was that? And it was like something that we would talk about all the time, as if it was like something that was just poking me constantly to figure out what it was. I think that the most important thing to me throughout the years of all these cases was not, are they true or not? It's just that there's so many, and there's such a pattern to the storytelling that there has to be a reality beyond, did the craft really land? Is the witness credible? There's just too many throughout time, before social media, before anybody could contact each other, that have the same story, that even if one person was crazy, the other people validate this experience. So for me, I think we're dealing with a phenomenon that isn't about being true or false, which I know people just love to talk about. For me, what's more exciting is, why is it happening? And why is it happening to certain people? Those are the two important questions that I ask myself when I read a case or I look at something, and I say to myself, that is what's interesting to me right now, because we're at this stage of consciousness where we really need to start asking that.
Yeah, and I think you hit on something that's really important, which is that I think as a society, especially within the last 5-6 years or so, like as UFOs are, if you want to call them UAPs now, whatever we're calling them today, now that they've really come to the forefront, and a lot of people with large platforms have really sort of advocated for the release of more information, I think we are sort of migrating towards this idea that we're no longer arguing whether or not these things exist. Now we're trying to debate, what are they? Where are they from? Are they ours? Are they someone else's? So it does feel like in that way, we've made some progress.
I agree.
Yeah. So I think one of the things I'm interested in is, you guys did a show in the Hudson Valley, and I'm always fascinated by areas like Catalina, and the kind of the sheer number of UFO sightings there, where there's seem to be geographical areas that have a very dense amount of sightings and experiences there.
Mhm.
What is it about, like, when you spent time out in Hudson Valley, what made that area so unique?
Well, that's a really good question. And that was what the whole show was about. It was like, why here? Why does it keep happening? That kind of thing. My theory, which is not sexy enough for TV and never made it. I think they have like a piece of like some sound bites of me like saying blah, 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 and then moving on to something way more sexy, that like Ben had. Ben got all the sexy lines. I was just like the crazy Mulder, like with some other alternative views. But
Mhm.
but from a scientific view, when they first called me and said, we want to do this show on Hudson Valley, and it's going to be you and Ben and the scientist. And immediately the first thing that came to mind was like, okay, if I was another species or other extraterrestrial life or alien or whatever, interdimensional traveler, how would I pierce the veil to get to 3D reality? How would I do that? Well, first I would have to accomplish how to space travel, time and space travel, which according to some quantum physicists, they have figured that out, which is, but they would have to use it in a way where they would have to have an in, right? And this is where that magical word in the community comes up, which is portal. Everybody wants to talk about portals. And, I remember even on that show, Ben's like, I don't think we should say the word portal because we're going to sound woo-woo. And I'm like, well, what else do we call it? Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So let's just say we figured out space travel. I mean, NASA does this today. They're going to launch a rocket. They're going to make sure all the stars are aligned. So the gravitational pull from wherever they're trying to hit is going to be right on target. So if I'm trying to target a location, I would need to have some kind of impetus to enter that dimension of reality. And I feel like a lot of people have done research on that, and that has to depend on where the location is. So there's some high probabilities of locations that have certain mineral deposits that create electromagnetic field that is unlike other areas without those mineral deposits. You can get into granite or quartz, or granite has a high levels of quartz in it. But there's other components of that create a strange electromagnetic field. So that's a theory. So the Hudson Valley area, this is the first thing that came to mind when they said, okay, what do you think? And I went into it and I researched that whole area, and they have some really strange high amounts of mineral deposits, and also unique ones at that. And also very strange populations and high densities of populations of different kinds of animals. So if I'm interdimensionally traveling and I need it into a location, and that location has a lot of things for me to test. I mean, Hudson Valley is like ground prime
Yeah.
entry point. And I know that can't make a whole TV show because, we need more investigations that are more exciting to watch. But the amount of data analysis I pulled from a study in early 2000s, because there was a big concern with the pollution coming from New York City into the Hudson Valley area and how it was ruining this very strange and very unique biodiversity that has been created in the Hudson Valley. And that location, that paperwork explained that the mineral deposits were so unique here that they were fighting for the preserve and a new pollution policy with the city. So I think that Hudson Valley is this very unique place that we've now put on the map because of that show to investigate. There was at one point, there was like in the 80s, 5,000 different cases of sightings and abductions and weird cases and missing time. And it just is like everybody in every dimension was visiting.
Yeah. I think that's where it gets tricky too, right? Like I'm open-minded to all these different ideas, but I think for the general populace, someone who would not consider themselves like a UFO fanatic per se, it's a stretch enough to get them to say, okay, there's something flying around in our skies that doesn't make any sense, and it's defying the conventional laws of physics. But it feels like a little bit further way to go for them to say, okay, abductions are happening, or these might be interdimensional visitors. That's almost like a bridge too far for a lot of folks. And so, but yet what you just said about the sort of the physical makeup of Hudson Valley reminds me of some other areas where we know there have been reports of all sorts of strange phenomena like Skinwalker Ranch and places like that. But they all seem to have that sort of thing in common where the sort of biology and the geology of the area is sort of unique.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, we have that in the Four Corners area. We have that around Roswell, and also Hudson Valley, just to do my due diligence, very close to one of the hot spots in Hudson Valley where there's a lot more sightings than usual. There's also, at one point, was a top security base where they were probably testing some things. And I clarified that with my dad. Just, in the 80s, there was this base up there, there was their top secret stuff. And he said, yeah, there was. Okay, so then are some of the sightings top secret, but the other ones, there was more than just the 80s. There was other flaps. And so I think what we were reporting on is that it was coming back. It was like in waves. There's another thing that Jacques Vallée actually wrote a book about the Hudson Valley. I think it's called The Siege. Am I correct?
That sounds right. Yep.
Yeah. And in there, he pointed out, I mean, of course, Jacques Vallée is like the GOAT, right? He's like the guy that reports on everything. And then at the end of the book, he's like, we still don't know, but I think they're fucking with us, right? That's like literally his MO. And I love that. Right. I love that guy, right? Yeah, and I would agree. Yeah. I would totally agree with him. At the end of that, like 2,000-page book, that's his conclusion. But in there, he says that there's two time periods during the year in Hudson Valley where, over the period of the 80s, where there seemed to be a conglomerate amount of cases, and that was March and it was July. And I was like, why? Like, why would these time periods be important? Okay, you could say, well, March is in spring, July is in the middle of summer. Okay. And then you're thinking, well, if there's a top secret base, they're only doing testings in March and July. And you're like, that doesn't make any sense,
Yeah. Especially in New York, like. It's probably it's still fairly cold in March, I would think. Yeah.
But it stuck with me. And what did stick out to me is March and July are two significant months in, I mean, maybe I'm jumping the shark a little bit, but I just could not get that out of my head when I read that in his book. And what I connected was, because I read a lot about ancient Egypt and ancient civilizations, is March and April are actually very significant months for ancient Egyptians. March is that March time period, the spring time period is actually the new year for them. It's a huge celebration. It's not January. That's the new calendar. The other calendar is March. The July time period is the month of Ra, right? This is the creator god. This is his birthday. This is the amount of ancient civilizations created on those first couple weeks of July are very important to the ancient Egyptians from all the stuff that I've read, and I've written books about it, written shows about it. And I thought, God, that's such a weird correlation that Jacques Vallée has reported that most of the Hudson Valley cases happened in and around March and July. And here we have a correlation between two significant months in ancient Egypt that have to do with the beginning of their new year, which is not just important because it's a new year. It's important because all the powers align to set up what they need to happen, and also July being the birth of the creator god. Just thought that was really interesting correlation.
I mean, that in and of itself is an interesting data point to notice the trend, there, and then to connect it to Egyptians who, for anyone who's watched Ancient Aliens and amongst other shows, there are some strong connections between UFO activity and the ancient Egyptians as well. So it's, it is an interesting time. You might be onto something there. So one of the things I think is interesting, and I'd love to hear your take on it too, is one of the projects that you did was called, one of the more recent ones, Inducted, Tom Reed's Berkshire UFO. First, talk about why that particular case is so significant.
That case is so significant because you have a lot of people that have similar stories of abduction. And and they're well documented by great ufologists. But this one is like a physical displacement of all of these people in, so if anybody listening knows the story, Tom and his family, his mom, his sister, and his grandmother they run this diner in town, in a small town in the Berkshires. And they're driving home. They leave the diner. They're driving home. Grandma is on the passenger seat. Mom is driving. Tom and his sister are in the back seat. And they head over this bridge, which is the center of the story. And once they cross over this bridge, it's some like weird time warp where they are on the road and they see kind of alien ships in the background. I mean, it looked like, with the way he explained it, it was like a sci-fi invasion movie.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, they're kind of sucked up into the ship and they're in the ship and he has this huge experience. And then the crazy thing was they then were placed back, then lights out, right? Doesn't remember that they all wake up in the car and they're all in different positions of the car and the car isn't where they left it. Now, this is a significant story because the actual findings of the car are confirmed. The different locations of the people in the car are confirmed. There's 4 different witnesses that witnessed the same thing. So this story is not just something to put into the books of like, okay, we're creating patterns. This is an excellent case to dive into time, missing time, whatever it is that grabbed them. And then, of course, evidence that it happened to all 4 people. Usually in a group of people, there's only one person that speaks out about their case or whatever. But I mean, Tom has really gone to fight for this because he wants people to know that there's something else happening out there. And yeah, I think he's done a really good job. They've created the whole park. They have like a monument to him and his family and everything like that. So it's cool.
Yeah, that one reminds me of some other cases that I would put up there with the most credible, and for a number of reasons. One of which being the thing that you mentioned about multiple witnesses. And so I love cases where there's multiple witnesses, that the witnesses themselves are credible people. Like anytime I can get one that has like an airline pilot or something involved, that's great because they know the difference between a bird and a balloon. Like, come on, let's not pretend like they saw a balloon by accident, like they're trained observers, But anytime where you've got multiple witnesses and also it's a case that happened long enough to the point where over time you would look for fluctuations in their story, but yet they remain very consistent. So I think of things like the Betty and Barney Hill case and Travis Walton and stories like that. Talk about like, what are some of your favorites in terms of like, these are your go-tos when you're trying to convince someone like, look, this one is pretty solid.
The go-tos. Well, physical evidence is always great because you can always return back to physical evidence, and everybody, when I say likes physical evidence, their mind can conceptualize the concept if there's physical evidence. So physical evidence is great. Definitely triangulating the case. So if there was something in the sky, did the local authorities report it? Did any of the local Air Force bases, not that they would tell us, or small airports or any airport, see anything in the sky? Is there any data we can get, from even some of the other departments, right? So that's another thing. How many people in the community or in the woods or in the area saw the same thing, experienced the same thing, never talked about it, had something else visit them a couple nights before, that kind of thing. Also, there is a human element of these cases. I think that is really important. And how do you know someone is telling the truth? And that's a personal thing, because we all have biases against people, how they say things, what they look like, where they came from, their education level. We create all sorts of stories in our head. But one of the things that for me as an investigator is the most important is when you bring something to them about their case that they told you they're looking for, and they have a different expression, like one of surprise, like one of complete horror, like literally like they go back into PTSD. When you can get that moment, like something happened to that person. And what that is, that we are on point. Ben and I covered a story in Hudson Valley of a guy who had a horse farm. He was in a very rural area. People had cows and horses and that kind of thing. And he had the same. He had several horses and he had some cows, and we were actually at the house where all of it happened, and no one was home. His family was traveling, or they were at someone else's house. And throughout the the months before this, there was a bunch of weird stuff. Like the guy down the street was talking about how his horses were really afraid to go in a certain field. There was like just weird lights and stuff in the sky. That wasn't just this guy's case. You know, weird things happen. You live out in the woods, like whatever. You got to move on, right? You have animals to deal with. And this guy's pretty simple, right? And so he comes home, he's tired. No one's at home. He decides to make like something in the microwave. And it's like 5 minutes or whatever. He turns on the TV. It's the beginning of a show. He watches the same show. I can't remember what the name of the show is. He watches the same show. And he knows how long it is. It's like, an hour show or something like that. And he hears this noise, like a tone in his head. And he doesn't know what it's coming from, the TV or the radio. He doesn't know. But in that instant, he's out, right? And he wakes back up. He's in the same chair. The TV, remember, he's timed out his show. Like he's had missing time for like 3 hours or something like that, because the show's done and there's something else on, and he's like memorized all of what's happening with the TV. The food in the microwave's cold. And he's like, what happened? Right? And he talks about how the neighbors come over like within 10 minutes of him waking up and say, what is going on? What's with the lights in the field? You're disrupting all my animals. And he's like, I don't know. I've been asleep. And they're like, something's happening. And they were really upset with him that he was like running all these lights in the forest and disrupting all of their animals. And so now he's really confused. And there was a bunch of sightings in the sky from some other people. And he really just wanted to know what happened to him because he had missing time and he didn't know. So anyway, Ben and I'm like, we need to find that tone. And so we had all those tones lined up and we got to 432 hertz. And we kind of wobbled it because he said it was like a wah, 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 like that kind of sound. And he lost it. Like his face was like, it was almost as if he went back there in that moment. Like it was so, the look on his face, something definitely had happened to him. And to me, yes, physical evidence is important. But now we've kind of confirmed that whatever happened to this guy, whether it was terrestrial, extraterrestrial, something definitely happened that night. And so I think if we would have had more time, I actually would like to spend more time with him and maybe take him to a hypnotherapist and get deeper into what happened. But his face was priceless. He literally went back into PTSD.
That's it for part 1 of my conversation with Melissa Tittl. I hope it sparked your curiosity and maybe even raised a few new questions about what's really out there. Part 2 drops soon, where we dig even deeper into alien contact theories, ancient knowledge, and what might really be at stake in the search for truth. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to rate and review the show and share it with a friend who loves the strange and mysterious as much as you do. It helps more people discover From the Void, and it means a lot. Until next time, stay curious.